So I'm Heidi Yewman, and I'm the director and the producer of the documentary Behind the Bullet. And it's basically a film about 4 people who have shot somebody and the impact that it's had on their lives. So basically what we did was we filmed each person. I would go to, for instance, North Carolina for a weekend to be with the family, to gain their trust, let them trust me, and then I got a better idea of what their story was. Came back a couple weeks later, and then that's where we filmed, and then did their whole entire story, and then put it all together into its own individual story with the narrative arc and everything. Did that for each separate story. Then, once we had everything, then we wove them in together and ended up cutting some stuff because it was too long, or there were themes that emerged. So we ended up sort of weaving everything together through that process. So the whole thing took about 3.5 years. And a lot of it was spent really building trust with the people that I was going to be interviewing. Oh, that's such a hard question it's hard for me to say which story was the most inspiring or which story was the most compelling to me, because they're all so very different, and I did that on purpose. I wanted everybody in the audience to identify with at least one of the stories. And so the North Carolina family, where the 8-year-old boy accidentally shot and killed his little brother, they were an evangelical Christian family, and I grew up in that kind of household, and so I really identified with them. Kristen, who was a victim of gun violence, she lived in the suburbs, and that was a familiar environment to me, and I've dealt with some of the things that she's had to deal with in her life. So all of them had compelling, interesting things that I could relate to. Will is from Philadelphia, African-American man who killed a person on the street and went to prison for 10 years. And I was surprised at how much I felt like I related to him. He grew up in a very different environment, but is around the same age. And he's an activist right now, and he works to help people in South Philly, young people, not follow in his footsteps. And so I was really drawn to his activism because I do a lot of that as well. So it is an emotional movie, and people are responding in an emotional way. And one scene in particular, Kevin, who killed an intruder in his home, in the film, he puts his dog down, who was very old, and he calls the vets, and they have to put the dog down. And a lot of people do respond to that. And I put that scene in there very intentionally because Kevin would have come off as very one-dimensional. He talks a lot about this shooting in his home and how these people deserve to die. They were in his home. He doesn't have regrets. And he comes off unemotional, and I felt like it was really important to show his ability to be empathetic. And he really was empathetic to his dog, has the capacity to really have a lot of emotion. And quite frankly, a lot of people have that same experience. People can't identify with Kevin in having killed somebody, but they can certainly identify with having to put a beloved pet down. And so, yeah, it really does impact people, and it makes Kevin much more three-dimensional of a person. So there's a scene in there that one of the characters, she uses a gun to end her life. And there's such stigma around suicide. And so I decided to make a very intentional decision, and that was to make sure that people didn't write off somebody immediately. And so I was worried because of the stigma of suicide that someone might see Kristen's story, see that it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and then say, well, have judgment towards that and say, well, she was weak, and so I'm not interested in this person or this story. I wanted people to fall in love with the people in the film, and then once that happened, then they could make decisions about what they thought about them. And so I did that with all of the characters, where I slowly developed the narrative so that people could really feel empathy and humanity towards them before they made any kind of judgment. And I thought that was important. So Taylor, the boy who shot his little brother in a family fire situation. He's 18 years old, and one of the things that I identified with him is when I was filming that particular scene, I had an 18-year-old son at the time, and I felt like I was trying to bring out my son. And so your question is about whether he was as closed off in real life as that we saw in the film, and the answer is he's an 18-year-old boy, and 18-year-old boys are just like that in my experience. And so I found that it was difficult to get Taylor to open up, especially about something that was so incredibly difficult. Clearly he has a lot of guilt about it, and shame, and the loss that he feels. And so we worked really hard. In fact, I ended up having my cameraman go in the car with him, and that's where he opened up the most, when he was driving. And to figure out that scene, I actually asked my son, if you were me and you wanted to ask questions, how could I get you to open up about something like this? And he said, oh, Mom, have him be in the car driving, or have him play video games and then ask him the question. But he's never going to open up if you're just talking to him one-on-one. So my son was really helpful in that particular moment. It did take 3.5 years, and it was a labor in love. There were other stories that I came upon that I pursued, trying to get other people to be a part of this project, and it didn't work out for various reasons. Either they weren't going to be able to open up. There were some other people that we did film, but their stories weren't quite the way that I needed them to be to bring in the audience. And so we spent time doing that, but it really was a labor of love. I fell in love with all of these people in terms of just really feeling for them in a way that I was surprised, especially with Kevin. He was the intruder that killed the intruder, and he, until I had filmed him, I was judgmental about people like him. And I have an empathy for him now and people in those situations, and I've become less judgmental. And so all of them in their own ways have opened my eyes, and I feel like I've become a better human being because of this project. And I'm hoping that will translate into the audience being able to have more empathy and look at gun violence in a new way. It is the package I want. There's little things about the sound maybe, or where I should have added maybe some music to a scene. It's pretty quiet, which I also did intentionally, because I didn't want to lead the audience. I think sometimes when I watch films, I get irritated when the music tells me what I'm supposed to feel, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to let people feel what they felt. And but there are a couple places where I feel like maybe music would have added, but I think filmmakers find this all the time, that a film really can never be perfect. It always can be tweaked, and then time goes by, and then you discover a new technique, or you discover a new thing that you see in another film and you want to add it. But at some point you have to say it's done and then get it out to the world. So I'm very pleased with the product that our team has created. Yeah, so I continue with my advocacy work around gun violence prevention, and it's really through telling these kinds of stories. So I've been exploring ideas around doing episodic kind of series, and in that all the people in this film are lay people. They are not trained, they're regular people like you and I. And I don't have anybody in there like cops or firefighters or anybody who's a professional with guns. And I think that might be something I would enjoy exploring, whether it's military or first responders, people who have guns professionally, and what's the consequence for them when they kill an intruder or kill somebody that's a threat to people, and what's their response, and how does that impact them even when they have professional training.